I remember the sound before I felt it, a deep, gravelly rumble that rolled up through my boots like the growl of some ancient beast waking beneath the earth. The air was still a moment earlier, heavy with the smell of wet rock and salt from the sea below, but that vibration turned stillness into tension. I froze mid-step on the narrow coastal trail, one foot balanced on a jut of shale, the other digging into gritty clay that looked too loose to trust. The cliffs of this section of the Oregon coast were notorious for giving way without warning, and I'd been testing my luck ever since the morning fog lifted. To my left, the cliff rose like a wall of layered chocolate and grey, crumbly and veined with slick moss. To my right, maybe 50 feet down, waves smashed into broken basalt ledges, sending sprays of foam that caught the weak afternoon light. When the rumble came again, louder now, I didn't have time to think, just ducked behind a drift of gnarled shorepine and pressed myself against the earth. A second later, the slope ahead of me gave way in a short, violent burst. Stones rattling like dice, chunks of sod tumbling down into the surf. The dust plume rose and mingled with the mist, turning the world into a ghostly swirl of brown and white. When it cleared, the path was gone. Completely. Where there had been a rough track hugging the cliffside, there was now a 10-foot wide gap of raw, exposed earth, roots hanging like tendons from the wound. The far edge looked even worse, cracked, sagging under its own weight, threatening to follow the rest at any moment. I could taste the grit in my teeth as I stood, brushing off the mud that clung to my knees. The sea kept pounding below, indifferent, as if it hadn't just swallowed a piece of the land. I turned around, expecting to retrace my steps, but that way wasn't much better. The rain from the night before had softened everything, and small pebbles kept trickling down the slope. I could hear faint clicking noises, a warning sign that the ground itself was rearranging, deciding what would hold and what would crumble. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knew I couldn't stay still long. Every second I hesitated, the odds shifted toward disaster. So I started probing for another route, something inland, maybe through the scrub above the trail. It wasn't much of a choice, just a steep, root-tangled climb up a narrow gully, but it was the only option that didn't involve a 40-foot plunge into rocks. I jammed my boot into a crevice, grabbed a root slick with moisture and began to climb. The cliff face was soft and unpredictable, the kind that looked solid until your weight proved otherwise. I didn't dare look down. The sound of the ocean faded behind me, replaced by the quick, harsh rhythm of my own breathing and the slow crumble of the world beneath my hands. Halfway up that slope, the earth shifted again. A low groan, then a faint crack, like the snapping of a giant tree limb. I froze, fingers locked around a root no thicker than my thumb, my breath caught in my throat. The sound came from somewhere above, and for a moment I thought the entire cliff might peel away. Nothing moved, though the dust drifting past my face told me something had. The root creaked, stretching beneath my grip, and I forced myself to move, slow and deliberate, trying not to send more debris sliding toward the void below. The gully narrowed as I climbed, pinching between two shelves of sandstone streaked with dark minerals. Every handhold came away damp and cold, the air sharp with the smell of earth newly torn open. My boots scraped against loose gravel, and I could feel the strain in my legs with every motion. It wasn't far to the top, maybe 30 feet, but 30 feet can feel like a mile when the ground beneath you doesn't want to stay put. I kept my weight close to the wall, moving upward one cautious breath at a time. Then, just when I thought I might reach the lip, a section of the slope gave way beneath my right foot. It happened so fast I didn't even shout, just pure instinct as I lunged forward, grabbing a jut of stone and hugging the cliff like it was the only real thing in the world. A shower of dirt and pebbles cascaded past me, pattering against my shoulders before vanishing into the roar of surf. My left leg dangled in open air. For a second, the whole scene, ocean, cliff, sky, seemed to tilt sideways. I pressed my face into the rock, breathing through the taste of salt and dust until the shaking in my arms steadied. I had to get my weight back on solid ground. With slow care, I swung my free leg sideways, testing for any purchase, and found a knot of tangled grass clinging to a root. It bent under pressure, but didn't break. Inch by inch, I hauled myself up until I was crouched again, trembling, but still alive. I didn't realise until then that I'd been holding my breath the entire time. At the top, the earth flattened into a patch of scrub and sand, dotted with wind-stunted pines. I crawled onto it like a man escaping quicksand, sprawled on my back and staring at the clouds racing overhead. My hands were bleeding in half a dozen places, and one knee throbbed where it had slammed against rock. For a while I just listened. To the gulls crying over the water, to the faint hiss of rain beginning again somewhere out to sea, and to the steady collapse of small stones still tumbling below. When I finally stood, the view behind me looked worse than I'd imagined. The landslide had carved a raw wound down the cliff, splitting the trail clean in two. There was no going back that way again. The only path left was forward, through a landscape that had already proven it could change faster than I could think. I adjusted my pack straps, took one last look at the grey churn of the ocean, and stepped inland, into a maze of wind, mud, and uncertainty. The inland route wasn't much of a trail, more a faint game path winding between stunted shrubs and crumbling ledges. Each step felt like a question I didn't want to ask. Will this hold? The soil was a patchwork of loose gravel, slick clay, and thin mats of grass that slid under my boots like wet paper. The sea wind came in bursts now, carrying the scent of salt and decay, and every gust seemed to tug at the slope itself, urging it to move. I leaned forward as I walked, instinctively lowering my centre of gravity, ready to drop to all fours if the ground gave way again. 100 yards in, I came to a hollow where water had pooled from recent rain. The ground there looked darker, heavier, a trap disguised as solid earth. I tested it with my trekking pole, and the tip sank in almost instantly. Mud, thick and cold, swallowed half the shaft before I could yank it free. I circled wide, scanning for a safer crossing, but there was no clear line through. The only stable ground was a slanted ridge to the right that led toward a jumble of boulders, likely old slide debris. Risky, but not as bad as the mire below. The climb up the ridge was brutal. Every few steps I had to jam my pole deep into the soil or grab at roots that tore free with a soft ripping sound. My breath came in short bursts, fogging in the cool air. Once, a rock the size of a basketball shifted beneath my boot and rolled, bouncing and splitting open in a puff of ochre dust. The sound it made as it disappeared into the trees below reminded me of that first collapse, deep, final, and far too close. I froze again, waiting for echoes, but the earth stayed still. When I reached the boulders, I dropped my pack and sat for a moment, shaking the tremor out of my legs. From there, the world opened up, an uneven landscape of broken hills and narrow gullies running all the way to the sea. The sun had started to burn through the haze, turning the wet stones a dull silver. I could see, far below, the scar of the collapse, still faintly smoking with disturbed dust. It struck me how small it really was, barely a few dozen feet of fallen earth, and yet it had changed everything about the way forward. I found a small stream trickling between the rocks, drank deeply and splashed my face. The water was icy, tasting faintly of minerals. As I crouched there, I noticed the faint tremor again, not from the earth this time, but from within me. Adrenaline tapering off, fatigue creeping in. I needed to move before my body started to stiffen. The boulder field stretched uphill toward a stand of firs where the soil might be firmer. That became my next goal. Always small goals, one at a time. I packed up, cinched the straps tight, and started hopping from rock to rock, testing each one before committing my weight. Some were steady, others rocked beneath me with a hollow clunk that sent vibrations up through my boots. Every time I leapt, I pictured the whole slope sliding again, carrying me down with it in a roar of dirt and stone. But it didn't. Somehow, despite the fragility of it all, the mountain held its breath long enough for me to cross. When I reached the trees, the air changed. The ground beneath the needles was soft but anchored by roots, and the sound of the ocean was muted by the canopy. I finally exhaled fully, realizing how long I'd been half holding my breath. The worst of it might have been behind me. But the forest floor had its own kind of silence, the kind that made you listen for things you couldn't yet hear. The forest offered a kind of false comfort at first. Steady ground, shelter from the wind, the faint creak of trees swaying instead of the grinding of rock. But as I went deeper, I realised the same instability that tore the cliff apart was at work beneath this carpet of pine needles. The soil here was soft and thin, resting on old landslide debris. Every so often I'd step on a patch that flexed faintly under my boot, a slow, unsettling give, like walking across a hidden lung still trying to breathe. I followed the slope upward, using the trees for balance. Moss draped from their branches, dripping from the morning's mist. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called, its voice bouncing through the canyons below. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see the trail again, but the collapse had swallowed it entirely. There was no going back, only a maze of ridges and gullies where the hillside had once been whole. After about half an hour of cautious climbing, I came upon a clearing, a flat patch where the trees had stopped growing, ringed by stones and ferns. The ground here looked deceptively solid, a mat of grass over a greyish crust. I took 2 steps into it and felt the surface sink with a low squelch. Reflex made me throw my weight backward just as the whole patch collapsed in a muffled slurp, revealing a pocket of thick, wet clay beneath. It wasn't deep, maybe 4 feet, but I could imagine what would have happened if I'd been in the middle of it with my pack. I skirted around the edge, heart hammering again, and pressed onward. The climb grew steeper, forcing me to use both hands to pull myself up slopes of loose dirt studded with roots. My gloves were slick with mud now, and every grab felt like a gamble. I could hear faint trickles of water running somewhere below the surface, small streams tunneling through the loosened layers. The sound reminded me of the moment right before the first slide, that hidden movement of earth, quiet but unstoppable. Then came another tremor, not as loud as before, but close, too close. The ground shuddered once, twice, and I dropped to one knee instinctively, bracing with my hands. Pebbles rained down from the ridge above, rattling through branches. For a few seconds, the forest was filled with the strange chorus of shifting earth, the roots groaning, stones clicking together like teeth. Then it faded, leaving behind only the drip of water and the pounding in my ears. I waited, listening, then forced myself to move again. Fear has a way of freezing you in place, but up here, stillness was danger. I kept my eyes fixed on the slope ahead, an uneven rise that promised a higher, more stable line of travel. By the time I reached it, the forest thinned, and patches of sunlight spilled through the branches. My legs were shaking, but the sight gave me hope. A high ridge, crowned by rock and scrub, maybe solid enough to follow until the terrain levelled. I dropped my pack again and sat on a flat stone to catch my breath. Below me stretched a landscape reshaped by time and weather, scar after scar of old slides, gullies filled with shattered trunks, earth still raw and red from recent movement. It hit me then how alive it all was. The mountain wasn't a backdrop, it was breathing, shifting, remaking itself moment by moment. And I was just one small thing clinging to its surface, trying to pass through without being rewritten too. I stayed on that ridge longer than I meant to, staring out at the fractured landscape. The clouds had thickened again, dragging their shadows across the slopes like dark hands. The ocean was just a thin, restless shimmer far below, its roar softened by distance. The land between us looked freshly wounded, slabs of pale stone jutting through torn soil, trees tilted at impossible angles, whole sections of hillside that seemed to be exhaling dust. I knew I had to keep moving before the weather turned. Rain could set all this loose again in minutes. The ridge narrowed as I followed it inland, the ground shifting from clay to coarse grit. For the first time all day, my boots made a sound I trusted, a dry crunch instead of a squelch. Still, the path forced me close to the edge, where the slope dropped into another raw basin. I could feel the wind tugging at my pack, could hear the distant hiss of pebbles sliding somewhere below. I quickened my pace, keeping my eyes on a stand of firs that marked the far end of the ridge like a promise of safety. Then, almost to those trees, I heard a new sound, a hollow pop, followed by a deep rumble that grew fast. The ridge beneath me shivered. I turned just in time to see a fissure open along the the section I'd crossed minutes before, dust puffing up like breath from a beast's nostrils. My first instinct was to run, but that kind of panic kills quick on unstable ground. Instead, I dropped low, balanced, and moved forward in careful, fast steps, each one deliberate. The rumble chased me for a few heartbeats, then faded into a crash as the far end of the ridge gave way, sliding into the basin with a sound like thunder muffled in dirt. When I reached the trees, I didn't stop right away. I kept walking until the ground felt anchored again, until I could lean on a trunk and feel its roots hold firm under my boots. My hands were shaking, my mouth was dry, my shirt plastered to my back. The smell of the place, wet pine, raw soil, and a faint tang of minerals seemed sharper now, more alive. I realised I hadn't spoken a word in hours, just breathing, listening, surviving. I followed a faint animal path down through the firs until I hit a stream, narrow but steady. Its banks were lined with bright green moss, and the water was clear enough to see each stone on the bottom. I knelt and drank until the cold made my teeth ache. The sound of that water, steady and unconcerned, felt like the most beautiful thing I'd heard all day. By the time the sun began to sink, the tremors had stopped. The forest settled into evening silence, and I found a dry spot beneath an overhang to rest. My legs ached, my palms were raw, but the fear had turned into something quieter. Respect, maybe, or awe. Out here, nothing stayed still for long, and the only real control I had was how I met the movement. I built no fire that night, just sat listening to the earth breathe beneath me, its slow and restless rhythm matching my own heartbeat. Tomorrow I'd find my way back to stable ground, but for now I was exactly where the mountain allowed me to be, and that was enough.